Welcome to Watch World with Faye, a new podcast in the watch and lifestyle space. I'm your host, Faye Soteri. I've been in the industry for over 20 years and I've been lucky enough to work with the people behind the brands, from some incredible independents and micro brands to the Goliaths. One thing that I've noticed as a common theme is every brand has its own unique story. Join me in meeting with these people as we bring these stories to life. Hello, welcome to Watch World with Faye. I'm delighted to be joined once again by my esteemed colleague, Mark Tolson. How are you, Mark?
I'm fine. I mean, we're not colleagues anymore because I don't work. Mind you, a lot of people said that when I was supposed to be working, but hey, here we are.
Well, that's true. Somebody's recently just said, could you remind Faye to whatever it was you were supposed to remind me to do? And I pointed out that for 15 years when I worked for you, you couldn't get me to do things that I'd forgotten to do. So I didn't, no idea why you're going to manage it now. Thank you very much for remembering to join me today.
Right.
Always enjoy this conversation. Since we last met, we have had the summer solstice, which soberly means to me that we are closer to 2030 than we now are closer to 2020. So we're halfway through this decade. Not that I'm wishing anything away, but it's one of those sort of benchmarks that we look towards. The reason it's sobering is because it probably is a significant birthday that year. But we still have plenty of time. And it being summer solstice this month, there has been an incredible amount of activity in the horological and watch world. So I thought it'd be a really great opportunity for us to have a chat, catch up. Love to know your thoughts and feedback on a few things. A lot of this activity was connected with each other and a series of events, but there are also a few things that I went to that was just sort of how it's placed in the calendar. And I feel like we're getting into hospitality season, I suppose, with a lot of activity that's going on at the minute. So if we start with hands-on horology, it was the first time it'd ever been done. You and I met on Saturday in Shoreditch, which is very cool for a watch event. What did you think?
It was fine. It was really good. It was a big venue. The Hands-on Horology Oracle team who organised it, I think, did a great job. There was over 40 brands there, I think, starting from relatively inexpensive, several £100s, going up to crazy amounts of money. So it looked good, lots of interest, lots of people. I don't know how many people turned up, but there were 2 sessions, morning and afternoon, like the British Watchmakers' Day in whenever that was in March, I think it was. It was great, really good event, and I think it was the first time they'd done it, so I would say it was a success.
Yeah, that and London Watch Week, which we'll come on to, that'll probably dominate quite a lot of this conversation. It was the inaugural events for both. I don't know if they'd been planned that way for people that were travelling to London to go to one to potentially join in some of the other activities, but what do you think the significance is? I want to go back and ask a little bit about the brands that were there, what your thoughts were. The one thing that I really liked was the natural daylight. Often at watch shows, there is really poor lighting. And for some reason, I feel it's important. Legibility and visibility of a watch is really important to me. So well done for whoever selected that venue, because it was brilliant. But it was the first one. What type of brands were there, and was it what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, just on the light and everything, it was Protein Studios, so a shout out to them because it was a great venue. An unusual name, though. I don't know quite why they came up with that, but I'm sure it means something. But what brands did I like? Well, Anordain were there, which was great to see because I wanted to see their new black dial they have, which was amazing. Lots of other stuff. Neil Duckworth was there with Prestex and his ever-growing number of watches, so he did some great things. Brew and Co., who I didn't really know.
Loved them. Really liked those watches.
That was great, wasn't it? It's a lovely shape, kind of a steel watch on a scround, as we might call it, a square round case, and it was designed for baristas to do the 25-second timing that apparently makes your perfect espresso. Who knew you needed a watch like that? But I'm glad people are thinking about things like that because I thought it was great. The colours on the dial were really good, so I was really impressed with that as well. Also, Solstice. Sorry.
Yeah, and as you pointed out to me, and not to the brands though, which it's a shame, was why did they not have the event on that day? But I'm sure.
Yeah.
Sure, it couldn't just be around one brand. Going back to Brew, I wasn't familiar with that brand.
No, me neither.
I thought they were great, aesthetically beautiful. The designer, it's the designer and owner and the same people. It's a husband and wife team based in the States. Colorway's beautiful, sub £500 from memory. It's a similar case shape to an Apple Watch, I think. As close, if you're going to sort of as close as possible to something that identify with. But I was really impressed with those, and all same price point. There were maybe a slight differentiator depending on strap or bracelet, but it was minimal, which I quite like. I like the simplicity of an offer like that. Then it literally becomes about which watch do you like and which watch do you want to wear. So I've been in contact with them since. Actually, I'd be really keen to find out a little bit more about them. What I found quite interesting was sometimes on these events when they're new, there's a nervousness as to which brands are comfortable showing, because there's a real, we were talking about it earlier, real snobbery sometimes. One brand won't go in unless another brand is going to be there, or a similar price point or perceived value. There's often some that's like, it's too low price point, or it's too high volume, too commercial. They often want to have a sit with their peers, I suppose, which is odd, because if they're competition in a price point or a perception, most brands don't want to be associated with each other. However, in the watch world, it's slightly different. I suppose it's to bring in the right type of clientele and draw them. So I do understand. I think often there's a nervousness with some of these events where brands are just like, well, who else is going? It's like, I'll only go to the party if the right crowd is seen there. But there were some interesting micro brands, as we've referenced, and some brands that were sort of long-standing, credible. We see in a lot of the places. Doxa were there. I always enjoy meeting them and the vibrancy that their team have. There were some slightly really unusual price points. There's one brand that I want to ask you about because of not the technology they did, but their price point in particular. But it was, I thought, as for its first event, it was really well done. A couple of competitions, which was nice. And there were, just like we saw at British Watchmakers Day, real collectors. Actually, the team from British Watchmakers Day were there coming to scope it out, which was fun. Yeah. I had a chat with them. What was the highest price point we were looking at?
I don't know. I mean, the highest price point I saw was it haut riv, which means high bank in your French, I believe. It was named that because they needed to build the watch factory on a high bank of Lake Neuchâtel, so it didn't flood. That was going back to 1888 or something, I don't know. But that was the most expensive watch I saw there, which is about 170,000 quid ex VAT, I think it was. And it was an amazing thing. I met the owner, Stefan von Gunten, I think his name was. It was a bit of theatre, because he made me hold one end of the mainspring, and then he walked away from me 3 meters. So the mainspring was 3 meters long, which is bloody long considering it's wound up into a tiny little case. And that gave 1,000 hours power reserve on this watch, which was a tourbillon, and it was amazing. So that was the most expensive watch I saw. But I didn't get round to everything. Such were the crowds. I think there was Antoine Peruzzi, or whatever his name is. He was also there. Now he did some of the big complications for Jacob and Co. years back. So he makes expensive watches. But I never got close enough to have a look. But yeah, a massive spread of pricing.
Interesting you were talking about that. I'd really hoping this would come up in the conversation, where up the sort of north of £100,000, and it was a tourbillon. I think the brand was called Blackout Watches. Looks like a Richard Mille aesthetically, really large case size, very masculine. Tourbillon, £2,000. I've got quite a strong opinion on this. I think you were looking at the product as well. What are your thoughts when you've got the two extremes in one space? £2,000 tourbillon. And how much did you say the
Jaeger LeCoultre steel master?
No, the one you've just referenced. So
that's about 170,000 ex VAT. So yeah.
Okay, so let's call it just closer to. Yeah. So you've got 2,000 and 200,000, right? Just in terms of for my simplicity, if you will. What do you think that does to the industry, or is it more for a collector? I mean, you I'm probably not being very concise with how I'm approaching this. What were your thoughts on a £2,000 tourbillon? I'll probably pick it apart from there.
I think for some people, £2,000, is a lot of money. It's 2,000 quid. It's not an insignificant amount. But tourbillons tend to be significantly more expensive than that in general. Quite like the sort of democratic appeal that somebody can buy a tourbillon for £2,000. I mean, the movement was made in China. I'm not decrying that, because that's the way lots of things are going. The prices come down, become more accessible. Does it take away the romance of that complication? Yeah, I think it probably does. But I don't think, if you're considering buying a a Patek Philippe tourbillon, you're suddenly going to be put off because the guy down the road has got a £2,000 tourbillon from Blackout. I mean, I think people know the difference between Pomaine and Champagne, between a Volkswagen Polo and a Ferrari. Both cars both do the same job. The excitement obviously is quite a bit more in the Ferrari than is in a VW Polo, for example, in the same way that I think the expertise and the history and the craftsmanship that goes into a Patek tourbillon or a Vacheron tourbillon is more interesting than a tourbillon at £2,000 from China. But I think it's a good move. I think it's a good move. I think it gets people interested in watches and collecting and maybe what the possibilities are.
Yeah, I suppose it also opens up the conversation for education as well. I had quite a vitriolic response to it, but I think for me it takes away the craftsmanship. That's the point. Whereas it's mass market, there's a big machine somewhere stamping out these pieces and sort of all the cogs and the wheels and all the elements that go into it. Versus, as you said, sort of Vacheron, Patek, Breguet, etc. In terms of how they do it. But I perhaps ignorantly, based on my background, I wasn't confronted with those price points and therefore didn't have the opportunity to explore it. So I don't know why I'd have such a reaction to that. Yet a chronograph at £500 from Brew, I absolutely adored. Maybe it was a combination of things because, in theory, a chronograph should be more expensive as well, etc., etc. But so it's a similar comparison. Why I enjoyed one and not the other, but it just stood out for me at the fair.
Well, maybe it's the shock that some people felt in 1970 when they discovered you could buy a quartz watch that was more accurate and a lot cheaper than a Swiss mechanical watch, and yet there is a resurgence there was a resurgence in Swiss watches, mechanical watches. They reposition themselves more expensively than a quartz watch, which you can pay £10, I guess, for a quartz watch. But they still coexist, and the cheap quartz watch doesn't exist to the detriment of a fine mechanical timepiece. Maybe that's the way to look at it. But maybe the shock that you're feeling is what some people felt in 1970 when they thought, well, it's a Japanese watch, it's got a battery in it. It's like a fridge or something, it doesn't make any sense anymore, So maybe that's the reaction you're feeling.
Yeah, perhaps. And thank you for positioning it that way, although I wasn't there in 1970. But it's valid. It is important that there is progression in every industry. It's the first time I've seen a £2,000 tourbillon, so it was interesting.
I was going to say, if anybody out there has got any comments about whether they think a £2,000 tourbillon is a good idea, it all adds to the debate, doesn't it?
Yeah, that'd be really useful. Thank you. Yeah, I'd love. Yeah, it'd be great to have some feedback and can continue that conversation. So I've got a funny feeling we will see them again next year, Hands on Horology, and that was it was a lovely day. You got a nice drink on entrance as well, so it was quite a friendly. It was a really friendly vibe, and
Lovely.
the sort of seeing collectors and enthusiasts was brilliant. I then dashed up to Manchester, to Old Trafford the next day. I was kindly invited by Norquain for the UNICEF Soccer Aid charity match, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I still don't know the offside rule. Most people there laughed at me. It was great to see some of what they did was they talked us through the product. They had the brand directors there. It's a family-run business, which I really enjoy. It's a young business and you can feel and see the enthusiasm. I wasn't too familiar with the brand before. Got to see the ice cream watch, which there's been all over socials recently. It's a limited edition, so it was quite nice to see it, and also the weather, as it has been in the UK this summer, was quite refreshing.
Yeah.
But loads of fun as well, and I like how brands sort of play. It's quite different from some of their other pieces. Whilst they've got bold colours, the chronograph and the pastel.
Yep.
And the pastel colorways was different from, because they are a tool watch. It's a strong piece to have on your wrist. They're an adventure watch. Their identity is skiing, or they're aligned with skiing. So that was brilliant. It was lovely. It was a really interesting dynamic for me. It's the first time I have been in an environment since sort of shifting from one side of the industry to the other, to have retailers and at a brand event and real watch enthusiasts that were invited by the brand, and press and journalists and influencers. And that was a really interesting dynamic to watch it from the other side. I wanted to thank Norquain for inviting me. It was really kind of them. The match was so much fun. And I wonder what how much that would have raised their profile as a brand, because it's a really good cause. A lot of brands do sponsorship, but there isn't so much in the charity sector, I think. I mean, maybe it just aligned well because they're a sports watch, so supporting a sporting charity worked well. But what do you think? Do you think it's going to enhance their brand?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the soccer tie-in, because I think they have Gary Neville, who used to play for Manchester United. He's their ambassador or
Correct, yeah.
appearing in some of their kind of promotional material. So, I mean, he doesn't play football now, but I think he's on podcasts and talks about football a lot. So he's quite visible. So, I mean, he's a good ambassador to have. And I think it will raise their profile. I mean, they've been in the market in the UK for maybe 6 or 7 years, but they've had COVID in that time, and they never had anybody running the brand in the UK. It was always kind of at arm's length from Switzerland, and there's a great benefit to be had for having somebody in the UK actually on the brand, and that's Martin Jenkins, who we kind of both know from our past lives, and he's a really good guy, and he'll push the brand. So I hope they get lots of success. I think they deserve it.
They look like they do deserve it. They look like they were really enjoying themselves as well.
Yeah.
So from, look, as I said, Martin, some of the brands he worked with were quite serious.
Yeah.
So hopefully it looked like they were having fun. The CEO's son was there and was sitting next to him having dinner. I thought, oh, that's just really lovely. It gets people. It's the personality behind the brand. Sometimes people are buying into the brand, but as I keep saying, a watch doesn't just tell a time; it tells a story. And they were telling the stories of how the foundations of their brand and why it was important to them. And it was lovely to see the generations. We've seen it. If you look at sort of the Swatch group, there's there are and obviously LV as well, of course. There's a family element, and Chopard's another one where they've got the generations. But I've not seen a 7-year-old join us at any point at any of the events. So it's just
Met a few people who behave like 7-year-olds in my career, but that's a whole other story.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Mark. I'm not disagreeing with you.
But coming back to the point about the people you met, they were, if you take out, the retail side that we always used to be on, but this is an event where you were with other people, the enthusiasts, the influencers, but people who got a genuine interest in watches. So that must have been a bit different for you.
I was going to ask you what the highlight of the week is, and I'll ask you later. But I'm gonna bring that in now because it was the highlight of the week for me, and it was quite a personal moment in that. I've had a really interesting journey through watches, particularly in this last year. I just had a thought on leave the industry, but then I really missed it, and that was largely why I wanted to start this podcast and spend sort of time talking to you and brands and other people in the industry. But what I observed was fascinating. Familiar with the events, yes. Where I was sitting on this side, I wasn't. So the dynamic is usually the largest retailer, or those with the biggest spending power, or the biggest client to the brand normally sits with the managing director. There's a real hierarchy. And you get it. They're the ones that are buying the brand directly from the brand and representing them on the high street, talking about them, showing them, introducing them to clients, etc. So from our background, I was used to being on that top table effectively most of the time. And I was, no pun intended, because it was a football match, but I was relegated, or I felt like I was relegated to the sidelines. And I was with the journalists and the influencers, and I had a collector next to me. However, it took me no time at all to realise this was my pack. They were interesting. They were interested. They wanted to be there. And I realised that I've been to many of these events. I've been really fortunate to be to many of these events previously because I had to, and it was part of the job. And yes, what a job. I've been wing walking with Breitling. We've been to Wimbledon finals. We've been, there's been so many, there's a huge amount of corporate hospitality. But that was the great part of the job. I was there because I chose to be, and being with those enthusiasts and this gentleman that was next to me. His background isn't watches, but he was there just because as a collector and a real fan of Norquain and a variety of others, talking me through his collection. I loved it, and I was like, this is wonderful, because you could see some of the retailers were their obligation. Lovely thing to do on a Sunday afternoon, of course, but it was absolutely the highlight of the week, and I loved talking watches, movements, opinions. I've got quite a few of these sort of these influencers I'm going to be chatting to actually on this channel. I'd not expected the shift, and I saw it from a different angle. It's just looking at a prism from a different. The room was still the same. I was just in a different seat, and I enjoyed it more than what I would have done before.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I kind of get that. I think one of the benefits of this modern age with Instagram and podcasts and on all those ways that effectively a startup brand, I'm not saying Norquain is a startup brand, but a brand that's trying to grow itself, their opportunity to do that these days is a lot more multi-layered than it would be 25 years ago, where you had to be hammering on the door of the big retailer in order to get the watch in the shop. Whereas nowadays you can reach out to all sorts of people who've got 20,000 followers or whatever it happens to be, and connect with people that way, and also sell from your own website and attend events like Hands on Horology or London Watch Week or the British Watchmakers thing. So there is a very different dynamic, and it's, I mean, at the top end watch brand, the clients and the relationship with retailers is always going to be quite exclusive, but I quite like this sort of democratic aspect to watchmaking, or to watch retailing, to watch selling, and the interest that people have in watches these days. I think it's really refreshing.
Yeah, and it gives everybody access should you be interested. Whereas, to your point before, if it was just retail and brands, whether it was these events, because social media didn't exist, it was a very sort of tight-knit, almost exclusive club. Whereas we've seen, as we sit here in June, we've done Watches and Wonders, and we've done a couple of UK events, particularly sort of London-centric, and it's the collectors that it's their choice, it's their passion. Coming from the retail side, it's commercial, it's how are sales, and what's the performance been like in Q1, and how did it perform, and which brands are performing, which aren't. And there's of course a need for that, but it's just looking at it from a different perspective. I was in a lift during London Watch Week, and there were two gentlemen and myself, and one said to the other, and you don't know necessarily who's who unless you know them personally. And one gentleman said, "Oh, I didn't get my first watch till I was 30. And I'm so embarrassed about this, because in my head, I thought, as a collector, that's a really nice thing to do. And then he took a breath. He was like, "Yeah, it's a Langer." I was like, "Okay, I'm really embarrassed about me assuming that this person," but he was a purist, a real collector, and then bumped into him at an event a couple of days later when I was with you. So he remembered me because I'd asked obviously a really stupid question, as I do in every event. But it was wonderful, and he was sort of well-educated. He'd clearly educated himself, and then you've got some of these other collectors, and he was enthusiastic at some of the other events that were asking loads of questions so they could learn more about something that they were beginning to get passionate about. That did not exist 20 years ago, as you said. So it's not just for the likes of us where we're able to engage in something that a world we've been part of for a long time. But I loved that dynamic and watching what the industry, how it's and the point of access is just so much lower. The barrier to access is so much lower than it ever has been, but in a really respectful way. For me, if I was going to sum up the week, it's community.
Yeah. And to that point you're making about accessibility, maybe that's why a $2,000 tourbillon exists.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I still don't feel right about it.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah,
but you're absolutely right. But please, can I just allow myself a few more before? Yeah, it's. I have no right to have an opinion that's so negative over something that's probably a really positive thing. However, I just wasn't comfortable with it. Can we move on from that now?
I think we should. Yeah.
So after Norquain, we then started. Actually, I went to Fellows Auctions, my first ever auction for anything. I think you've been to an auction anyway before, but
now, isn't it?
Pardon?
This was London Watch Week now, from the 17th.
Yes, but Fellows, it was started on the same. I went to them independently because they've got their auction. They do one a month, but there was an auction at Bonhams, and that was one of the places was hosted a lot of the London Watch Weeks events. So this is what I mean. There was an utter frenzy of activity last week. So I went independently. I was invited along. Beautiful location in Mayfair. A townhouse. They operate as an office, but also for people to come and preview ahead. Now, they've been quite clever. I'm sure they're not the only person that's done it, but it seemed quite clever. They did watches and handbags. They do one auction a month. Interestingly, they only do online. Since COVID, all of their auctions are online. When I went to Bonhams later, which will be what you were referencing, they had an auction last week, and that was in the room exactly as you've seen on the telly. And I missed it because you and we went to one of the smaller shows that were there, but I'm definitely going to get myself down there just for the experience. But I'd never thought about purchasing a watch through an auction. It opened my eyes. I was educated. You can have so much fun. You can probably go a little bit mad as well, but it was great. And there were lots of watches, as you would imagine, that you can't so they had a platinum Daytona, which you've got to be on a waiting list for in retail, or you've got to be approved by the retail director or something along those lines. They're not that necessarily that easy to get. And I suppose it plays into the second-hand element. But have you ever looked at a watch auction in particular?
No, I mean the only thing I ever bought was a sofa from Lots Road, and that was a physical auction, and that was one of those, kind of raise your hand or scratch your nose and you find you've bought a sofa. And I would imagine for the sums involved in watches, that could be quite nerve-wracking for people. So maybe the online auction, because people get used to, I don't know, eBay, and I'm watching whatever this thing on eBay and I'm putting my bid in and all that. Maybe that's it's a good way to get into it. It's a nice way to kind of easy way into the world of buying a watch at auction.
Yeah, I was fascinated by it, and I'm going to continue to sort of delve a little bit into that world. And I think it adds another dynamic. You can buy new retail from authorized dealers, high street stores. Pre-owned is becoming such a big part of our language, but auctions for me was very new. But I think there's a real place for it, and they can obviously authenticate. Thank you very much. Verify you've got the confidence that you're buying, an original piece. But I didn't know that the nuances behind it, in that it's still owned by the owner. They merely facilitate the sale. And I was asking about, how, if people go, how they price it as well. Mm-hmm. That was the fascinating thing for me, I suppose, because some of them, the starting price seemed to be really low. And they gave me an example where they had bought a bag of parts for £40, or they were going, the reserve price was £40. And the person who was the owner of this bag of parts was just like, that absolutely not, too low, can't do it for that. And they said, it's just the reserve price. It went for £2,000. They were just broken bits, broken parts effectively. Now, everybody knew if they put it on for sale for £2,000, it would get no interest whatsoever. But it was the experience and the process that, and so I've got an interview with fellows later this year. Actually, I just, out of my own curiosity, I was like, what advice would you give anybody if they've never been to an auction? And she made it really simple for me. She was just like, keep your budget and have fun. I was like, that's great. If you've got your eye on something. But I can see you use eBay as an example. I've been very guilty many a time of spending far too much on something that I didn't really want just because somebody else was going to get it. You can imagine how that would work with premium watches.
Yeah, I've had nights out like that as well. But the she you were referring to was Laura Warrilow, wasn't she?
Yes.
Recently appointed head of watches or something at Fellows.
Yeah, head of watches at Fellows. She's in London a couple of times a week because they've got this London presence. But they're a family-run business, Fellow Auctioneers, that are based up in Birmingham. And again, I didn't know too much about auctioneers and auction houses, so I got an overview. They were just genuinely lovely people, and they took I felt I was almost embarrassed because I knew very little about it. And that's what I'm loving doing it at the minute. If watches is the nucleus of everything that I'm doing, there are so many different touch points. And Laura and her team talking me through it, whether it's pre-owned, whether it's the crossover in lifestyles with wine and watches, or just, the correlation with cars. You reminded me earlier that we've got F1 next week, so we'll talk about sponsorship, so you can talk to that in a minute. But there are so many different touch points, and I've gone from spreadsheets to storytelling, and there are so many different stories all around, the people, the community, the influences. But it's the enthusiasm, but I forgot or didn't even know how varied and multi-layered it is, and I'm really grateful for that.
Because the thing that fascinates me about the Fellows thing you went to the preview was the fact it was watches and handbags. Because you traditionally think watches are a bloke thing, and handbags, I don't know whether any male collectors of handbags. There may be some, but that seems decidedly female. And it's an interesting thing to put together. So I don't know quite what the demographic of buyers is, and whether people are speculating on handbags.
Wealthy ones, based on the watches and handbags they had there.
Sorry?
Wealthy ones.
Yeah. But I just wondered if it's if there's a dividing line that the blokes are looking at the watches and purchasing, and the women are looking at the handbags. Is it a lot more nuanced than that? I don't know. It's quite an interesting thing for them to put put those two together?
Well, it's a good question, and I'll ask when I meet them actually, because I don't. Traditionally, they've had a sale every month. I don't know whether it could be for a negative reason, in that neither were getting enough traction. So if you sort of pool your resources, but I think as luxury accessories, they work really well. I was given free reign in this beautiful store, and I was pairing watches and handbags.
Yeah.
So I had a platinum Daytona with the ice blue dial, and there was a ice blue Chanel handbags. For me, that, and if you're going to talk about gender, that watch went really well with that handbag. I just don't have the money to purchase either. There was a beautiful Cartier and another sort of Chanel quilted, and the colours match almost identically. It was almost like, why doesn't anyone do this together? And I suppose it's the same as if you're looking in a department store. Accessories aren't matched together. It's handbags, it's shoes, it's watches, it's jewellery, it's lingerie, unless it's within a branded. But they're still sit in their lanes effectively, and maybe that's what I like, the creativity of what Fellows had done. But then the next day jumped over to I went to Bonhams that afternoon, the kickoff of London Watch Week. And that was a very sophisticated environment as well. It was lovely. The head of watches there were some talks. Did you see any of the talks?
I didn't, unfortunately, no.
But okay, you were at some of the other activity later in the week, and you got to speak to quite a lot of the people, a lot of the brands. Again, this was that accessibility piece where the talk I went to, I missed the first one, 30 years of watch collecting. Okay. Justin Hast, who was one of the hosts, or the founders, of London Watch Week, and the head of watches at Bonhams, and some of his stories were incredible. He actually used to be a former watchmaker, so real credibility to both those conversations. But that was great, and it was a different auction. They only do two watch auctions a year, and again, some pieces that I couldn't tell you the last time I saw a leopard print Daytona, but I got to wear one. Didn't bid. What were your highlights of London Watch Week? Actually, what were your thoughts? Because again, it was the first of its kind.
Well, I think the whole idea of it, and congratulations to Lucy, James, and is it Ed Exton, or what's his the other guy, Exton? Anyway, the three of them did a great job putting the thing together. And I mean, the activities, as you say, there was the Bonhams preview on the Thursday and Friday. They were the independent watch brands kind of fine watchmaking thing, which I went to the Thursday. I think it was loosely tied in with the Zenith event in the Thursday evening, which we went to. And then on Friday, I think there was an Norris event on the Friday evening. And then on the Saturday, there was a vintage watch dealers event. So I think that was all great, because you got a mixture, you got something to appeal to everybody. You'd got, vintage watch dealers, you'd got the excitement of the auction, and you'd got new products from the independent fine watchmakers like Chapek and Ressons, who I always like to go see, both those two brands in particular, but Laurent Ferrier, Ludovic Baloise. So there's a cross section of high end stuff, and it was great to see. And I mean, hats off to the team behind it for putting that whole thing together, because they all seem to be well attended, the things that I went to. And that wasn't because I was there. That would normally put most people off. Despite my appearance, people were there because of the products and because of the offer and the occasion. So I thought it was great. I really did think it was hopefully a successful week for them.
Do you think it's a sign of things to come for both Hands-on Horology and London Watch Week?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, I think that brands are reaching out to clients directly is a good thing. I mean, obviously they're biased. They're not going to say, the Chapek people are going to say Chapek are great, but you get the opportunity to meet the Chapek team, etc., and have a good chat. And obviously the people behind the brands know more about the brand than anybody else, so they're always good for a conversation, and I think people like that. So yeah, I think. I mean, I hope it will continue, along with British Watchmakers Week in March or whenever it was. I think that was the second episode of that. I hope this London Watch Week continues to be a feature and a bigger part of the horological calendar in the UK. I think it would be really positive.
I think what they've all done really well is none of them are a replica of one of the other events. Yep. So London Watch Week was exactly that. And it was a multi-location series of events, and it was from education to commercial to sales to covering all of those different elements. Whereas the watch fairs were a bit more specific to, it was a sales event, and you could obviously sort of chat to people, but it was, the product was there, and all of them were. And then, as you said, British Watchmakers Day, well, it's says what it does on the tin. I wonder how this will affect Watch Pro event, because I think that's lost its way a little bit. And it's not a criticism, because not everything can be great all of the time. Actually, they've just named the new editor for Watch Pro, Alex Deek. Is that right? Is the new editor there. So we'll probably see some changes in that event. But I know the feedback from the brands for the last year and the year before hadn't been too positive. So this actually might give it an opportunity just to go, right, let's take a beat, review what is missing, because it seems that some of the new guys to the watch event space is doing it new, but better as well.
Yeah, you're probably right. It's good that there are watch events in the UK calendar, so I hope Watch Pro do whatever they need to do to invigorate that, because that tends to be around September, October time, I think, doesn't it? So
yeah, well, it was a hangover from not in the true sense, but from Salon QP, and that was very different. So they'd obviously decided to make a change with it, and it worked for a couple of years. But I just feel it's lost its way a little bit. If anything, this will give it the opportunity. What's happening at the minute will give it an opportunity to review, see what worked from that event, and raise it, because there's a few events around the UK. There's one in Birmingham and Manchester traditionally, but London doesn't really have any, which is odd if you think about it, because you think about the demographic of people that live here or work in the city, whether you're going to do stereotypes or not, sort of, whether it's bankers that like their watches, or whether it's the only example that comes to mind right now, so not very good, but it's interesting that there hasn't been that many events, but I think to your point, the brands there, they're present, they're visible, they're able to speak to the clients directly, and long may it continue. I had a great week, and then there's some activity coming up next week with IWC. I get to do my first red carpet event. There's a premiere of the F1 film, which is interesting, because obviously TAG have got the sponsorship. They're the official timekeepers, so they're not that's got nothing to do with the film, but that will be great. And then there's also a big Bulgaria event. They've got a new advertising campaign, and we're sort of invited to see that, but it will be interesting to see how they're changing, because I think they've got quite a strong identity as it is, but so it'll be interesting to see how that moves on. But there's a huge amount of activity, and it's been so much fun, but it's not a daily reality.
It's not, no. One of the things we went to was the Thursday night thing with Zenith, the Roman Marietta, the product designer.
Manetti.
Sorry?
Was it Manetti? Sorry. It was, the location was, the brand's creative director.
Yeah, the brand's creative director. It was at Minotti, the furniture store just up at the back of Oxford Street. They had their product designer there, and he was talking through the 160th anniversary of Zenith and the watches they were producing. So that was fascinating, and it was a great night. It's good to hear how they had approached that 160th anniversary for Zenith, for what is a truly great brand with amazing movements, and how everything was blue because it was Zenith's color. So there was blue ceramic in the pilot's watch, and the Defy Skyline, etc., and the Chronomaster. Everything was blue, and it was fascinating. Really was. The
platinum model that was with the original movement.
Yeah, the caliber 135 in platinum. That's about nearly 45,000 quid. But if you wanted it on the platinum bracelet, that would be...
Did it double it from memory?
I
almost
think something like that, yeah. I mean, it probably would have weighed a ton, but that's an amazing dial, isn't it? I think it's got this lovely blue dial, platinum case, this 135 movement, which I think was it the watch that won 5 consecutive timing awards in the Dizor something, which nobody had ever done before at that time. And it's got 13mm balance wheel, which is pretty big, which he drew our attention to. And it's an amazing watch. I mean, if you can get hold of one of those and you've got £45,000, it's a good place to put it, actually. It was an amazing timepiece, that.
Yeah, well, they're limited editions as well, and I quite like that this year that they kept it. They did a model in line with each of their significant pillars, but all in that blue. It's an important year, and I think that's okay sometimes for brands. We don't need it to be about a million different launches and the best new collection they've ever done. These are the hero pieces of each collection, and we are celebrating it with the blue, with the blue ceramic. It was and the Zenith team are wonderful. So actually, speaking of which, I don't know if it's under embargo. It won't. Well, I don't know about the product, but there's a collaboration at Time and Tide in July anyway, so that will be interesting to see. I don't know. I was going to ask, do you think it's an anniversary piece?
Idea.
Okay, so we're both in the dark on that one. Okay, we look forward to seeing that. I think the Time and Tide space has got a lot to do with this community building as well.
Yeah.
I know when it first started, I was a bit like, well, is it a shop? Is it a lounge? Is it? But they do a lot of events. Oh, there was also a Blancpain event there during London Watch Week.
Yes.
I couldn't go to that. It clashed. I think it clashed with the Zenith event, so it wasn't aligned with London Watch Week. But yeah, I think they do a really good job of the hosting the community. Hopefully at some point I'll be speaking to Andrew. They're opening up their new. I congratulated him because I saw him in Manchester. Congratulated him on the new New York space. From the pictures I've seen, it's going to be in one. It's in Soho, I believe. So great location, open brickwork, really industrial, but it's a really sexy environment. So, but yeah, I mean, congratulations to the Time and Tide team, and some of them are again sort of multiple guises over the years, so it's always fun to catch up at these events and hear what's going on. I think we're running out of time, but I would like to know what your highlights of the week were.
My highlight, so it was actually, I mean, I love the Zenith event because I love Zenith, but it was actually seeing a lady wearing an IW 375508. So for the anoraks out there, that was the IWC Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar chronograph in white ceramic with 18 karat gold pushers on a white leather strap. She had it on. Now that watch came out in about 1986 and was a production run for about 9 years. And there's so much ceramic around these days, but IWC were the first brand to use ceramic. And I remember that watch from the early 90s when I worked for the importer at the time of the people who imported IWC, a company called J.W. Benson that were owned by Asprey. And I handled that watch. I used to do stuff in the stockroom and all sorts of things in those days. And it's great. It looked fantastic on this lady, this girl, and it was an unexpected sighting from across the room. And I think it's nice when, well, because I'm old, because I remember it from way back when. But it was great. I've never seen anybody wearing one, and it looked so good on her. And credit to her for having the foresight to think that's an interesting watch. And when you think it was one of the first ceramic watches, it was in white ceramic. Everybody knows the Chanel J12 and think, oh, white ceramic, that was it. But IWC were creating this thing, and of course it's got the Kurt Klaus perpetual calendar movement. And for anybody who knows IWC and the development of perpetual calendars, he's a legend. So seeing that was a bit of a moment for me. Actually, I felt quite emotional. It was great.
The lady that was wearing it was Secret Diary of a Watch Girl, I believe is her handle on Instagram. And yeah, it was well, you, Mark, your knowledge, my mind is always blown when I listen to you talk about the movement. So it was great that I like the fact you're still surprised at things that you see. Yeah. And if I may, just to wrap it up, I think that's the whole point on community. Yep. And in this bonkers little watch world where none of us need a watch, but it's interesting that you can still get ignited, interested, and sort of so enthusiastic about it. Look, I'd love to thank you very much for your time again and for joining me on all of those Watch Week events. Hopefully there'll be some more activity coming up. To everybody here, if you could like the channel and subscribe, I'd be absolutely thrilled. It really does give us the opportunity to continue with this, and any comments you might have, we'd be really grateful for. So until next time, Mark, I will speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye.